Welcome back again to the Imaginary Gallery. It is TJ, and we are still discussing how to spot a dangerous person. Before you get involved, we're on to the next of the 8, which I covered the first, which actually wasn't the first, but this is actually the first in the book, of the different types of dangerous, as Sandra L Brown, M.A., describes. And remember, these are not all-inclusive. They can be spread among each other. They can be blended. And one thing else she didn't mention, I don't believe, is that if you're dealing with an actual cluster B, it's likely that the personality traits you will encounter with the cluster B will be like they pick from the 8 chapters of the different types of like, I'm going to try this one, and they try it, and then later they pick a different one, and it's quite sickening. Which I would think she would have brought that up because, well, we'll just go into the first one. It's called the permanent clinger. And she starts off with saying, "Are you looking for a love that'll never leave you? Well, here he is. But remember, the operative word is never. When you pick Alan Adoration, he wants it to be forever." So she says the permanent clinger naturally attracts others who have spent too much time with the other types of dangerous persons. Emotional predators, violent people, emotionally unavailable people, all of whom will be explored in other episodes regarding these 8 wonderful people. When dealing with all of these types, initially it makes the permanent clinger look like a gift from heaven. Jesus! It's not uncommon for targets to swing from relationships with other types of dangerous partners into the arms of an attention-giving clinger. However, although predators, violent persons, addicts, and emotionally unavailable people may seem more overly dangerous, clingers harm their partners via a hidden agenda of incredible neediness. A neediness so extreme it can become abusive. So this is the problem shared by people who get involved with either permanent clingers or their cousins, which would be parental seekers, which will be addressed in another episode. Both of these types of people look so much less pathological than other types of dangerous people that we may get caught off guard. Guilty. They aren't looking for dangerous under the guise of meek and mild. People who have been burned by involvement with more frightening types of dangerous monsters feel that they are relatively safe if they date somebody with the consistency of a limp spaghetti. But make no mistake, she says, clingers are pathological. So, clingers appear to be emotionally sensitive, which is a quality many people may find irresistible. Almost like one of your girlfriends. They can empathize, sympathize, and cry over past hurtful experience. Too many people step up to the plate as well when dealing with these types to try to mend the injury caused to these people by their sisters in the dating game or brothers. In reality, the sensitivity that initially attracts us to the clinger repels us in the end. It merely masks severe neurotic problems in the clinger. Unmet needs from early childhood are most likely the culprit for the clinger's extreme need for attachment to you. But what starts out as mere desire for attachment turns into suffocation. His or her clinging eventually begins to obstruct the airways of the person he's involved with or she's involved with. And what she or he continues to pour into it in terms of reciprocated attention only satisfies the permanent clinger for brief periods of time. Whereas the parental seeker, which is a different chapter, wants motherly attention from you, meaning he or she wants to be waited on and pampered, the permanent clinger is willing to do that part for you. Frantic in its need for you not to leave him or her alone, even for a moment, it will exhaust you with personalized attention. It will willingly breathe your exhaled air. It is too willing and too able to supply every bit of attention you could ever want or could stand, which sounds a lot like the love bombing, which is probably what she's referring to without knowing it. However, clingers are emotionally needy people. Many of them could qualify for a diagnosis of avoidant personality disorder when you begin to set limits with them. They melt into victims and act as if you were asking something that would just kill them. But most of us are merely asking for a little space or time with other friends. A clinger's relationship toolbox is filled with guilt and demands for time and attention that it uses on others to keep them to himself because it has few friends or interests. Because of its own lack of a life, it doesn't see demands on you as unreasonable. But giving up your interests, your friends, your family, and your life is just the beginning of what it takes to keep this clinger from pouting, throwing temper tantrums, or becoming paranoid. The more you give up, the more secure the clinger feels. Initially. But then comes the next request for you to surrender your needs, and the next, and the next. The bar keeps getting lifted higher until it's beyond anyone's capabilities. This clinger's wanting to be the center of your attention soon turns out to be needing you completely. Likewise, the attention it gives you turns into jealousy and paranoia in attempts to prevent you from having an outside life. A clinger's paranoia is a hidden tool. It will act paranoid whether or not it really feels that way or not, to control you into giving up the parts of your life that he or she is afraid for you to experience. The paranoia can be about your girlfriends, your job, your family, your male friendships or female friendships. Basically, any outside life you have can cause paranoia in a permanent clinger. Neurotic and dependent, it can only find its sense of self in relationships. Therefore, anyone will do to keep his or her awareness focused away from the lack of self-identity. The people he dates are not truly important to him or her and of themselves. They are only important to the extent that they help the clinger avoid feelings of his or her fears. Great person. Clingers are preoccupied with criticism, which is real or perceived, and rejection. They're hypersensitive to the smallest correction of their behaviors. A clinger views itself as inept in most situations and feels incredibly inferior. The demeanor can be described as shy, quiet, fearful, and sometimes intense. Clingers avoid responsibility at work. They fear the criticism that may go with a job promotion, so they tend to be low functioning in their careers. A clinger fears the disapproval of coworkers, the boss, or just about anyone. This keeps it the low man or woman on the totem pole when it comes time for promotions, because this one doesn't step forward. It's just as awkward in social situations as it is at work, so it doesn't want to hang out with your friends. It sees ordinary activities as threatening. As a man or woman with avoidant personality disorder, which is a form of pathology, the clinger finds him or herself in every relationship some reinforcement of his or her view of him or herself as limp and impotent. As the men or women leave him or her, how that self-perception is reinforced is forever changing with the next person who arrives. The clinger never feels secure because the self-concept he or she has is based on the woman or man that it is with at any given time. The clinger becomes frantic at the end of a relationship. It tries to prevent it from ending as it feels its sense of self is slipping away. His or her lack of an identity causes others they're dating to be the primary focus of its life, so he or she can avoid loneliness and feelings of rejection. Clingers get left because their partners become exhausted. Clingers have histories of partners fleeing their death grip clutches. Partners give more to them than they do to newborns. Clingers cost more than the national debt in emotional and emotional resources, but still their needs remain unfulfilled. What clingers want and need is beyond the ability of any person to provide. You cannot and will not ever meet the needs of a clinger. It's a black hole that sucks partners or dates' souls into it but remains unsatisfied. Sounds like the empty vessel. Whatever their childhood deficits were, it's clear that draining the life out of their adult relationships will never fulfill what they failed to get as children. So the clingers are difficult to break up with. I know. They will cry, cling, threaten to harm themselves like Glenn Close, Fatal Attraction. They'll call repeatedly and verge on stalking you in order to avoid being left or rejected. Although all this drama may feel flattering to some partners, be aware it is not about you. It's not about your personality, your dreams together, or the uniqueness of your relationship. It is merely that you are a breathing object whose presence helps the clinger to forget what it fears most, which is rejection. People who date clingers frequently make the mistake of thinking that if they beef up this person's self-esteem, they can quickly slip out of the life of this person. One problem here: this clinger's esteem never gets built up, so there is never a good time to end it. Now, in relation to the permanent clingers, who do they seek? Sandra says, since permanent clingers appear to swoop in to mend the wounds left by other dangerous partners, those of us with recent histories of devastating breakups or dirty divorces are good targets for these creatures. Those of us who have consistently chosen partners who are narcissistic, self-focused, or emotionally unavailable provide just the right feeding ground for these clingers. Because clingers particularly like sensitive partners and can talk their language, it is music to our ears to hear another person express exactly what we're feeling, since he or she has been there too. Mirroring. We find an immediate connection with people who speak the language of having been dumped and misused by past partners. We tend to call these clingers good guys or good gals, or the last really nice man or woman, because their true status as perpetual victims is cloaked in mutual wound licking based on a shared history of poor relationships. The clinger appears to be more like a friend who's recovering from his or her own heartbreak than it does a pathological individual. Clingers count on being considered cordial, supportive, and like-minded to others who want nothing more than to share stories about their painful pasts. These clingers fantasize about idealized relationships, especially since they've never had one. those of us who share these fantasies will be drawn into this concept. Don't do it. Of relationships. It all sounds good to the ear. The only problem is that this clinger has never lived it before. It's a fantasy based in non-reality. Anyway, that's my own 2 cents. People who grew up in families with neurotic men or women might have their guard down against this type of dangerous person. Potential victims who don't want to be seen as rejecting and critical end up with clingers because even though the red flags may start waving soon after meeting them, they don't want to hurt its feelings by ending the relationship. This is just the type of partner the clinger banks on, knowing that, like him or her, sensitive partners might have been wounded makes these partners likely candidates to want to avoid hurting someone else. It's a theory that is paid off over and over again in this clinger's dating history. Now, this is advice to you from Sandra. Partners who think they can love another person out of its devastating history are particularly attracted to permanent clingers, as well as the mentally ill and the parental seekers, which are coming up in the future. Partners who believe that the clinger just needs the love of a good person should stick to singing country and western songs at the karaoke bar instead of dating this type of dangerous person. Because it can take years to rebuild yourself and your life following involvement with such a clinger.
You know what? Never mind. This was all a big mistake. I thought you still had some kind of feelings for me, and I can see that you don't. I have saved myself all this time and even became a lesbian, and you won't have anything to do with me now? Oh.
Come here. Come. What's the matter? So what? I thought you'd be proud of my new lesbian lifestyle. It doesn't mean you and I still can't have fun like we used to, if you know what I mean. My new lover, which I don't have, is nowhere to be found, so I'm all yours.
Look, I know I've said a lot of things that I didn't mean, just as you have. But let me ask you one question. You know I've never lied to you, don't you? You know that I would never lie to you. All of those inconsistencies that popped up were all due to some other circumstance, I hope you realize. Because I love you, and I love you and no one else. So, if you don't believe me, well, that's your problem. Because I have never lied. I don't lie. Ever.